What
And
happened?
we're live.
I have a picture on my screen.
I can see you. We're all good. And
Yep,
we've
we're
got
live.
agenda. Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll now begin our regular council meeting of the Township of Capmonigan on this Monday, July 5th. I'd ask for approval of the amended agenda to include the revised planning report 2021-35 Tower Hill North Development Limited official plan amendment OPA number 7 zoning bylaw amendment ZBA-07-18 and plan of subdivision 15T-18002. Moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Motion is approved. I'd ask that any members declare any pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof at this time or when the situation arises. Seeing none, there is no closed session, so we will move into item number 6, presentation, item 6.1. Veronica and Joanna, 2019 financial statements and audit from Baker Tilly.
Thank you very much for having me. I assume you can hear me now?
We can. Welcome, Joanna.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we are here to present the 2019 financial statements. We will address kind of the delay in that and the reasonings for that as we go through, but we're happy to be here and I don't think it will be much longer and you'll see us for the 2020. So that's a good thing. It's all good. On the next slide, so the presentation, I should say, does it summarizes in your package, you got the financial statements as well as our post-audit letter. And this presentation summarizes the highlights of both of those. But of course, we're happy to address any questions that you have from the letter or from the financial statement specifically. But this kind of is the highlights of both of those documents without us having to go through it all page by page in detail for you. So on this page, we have the most important paragraph from the Auditors Report, and it's the second paragraph if you're looking at the full Auditors Report. And it says, in our opinion, these financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the municipality at December 31st, 2019. And it does talk about that they are in accordance with the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards, which we as you as a municipality, you have to follow. So that's the standard accounting policies for municipalities. On the next page, we go through the procedures that we have to do as part of our audit. We should note that it is a risk-based audit. So we spend more time in kind of the riskier areas and less time in the areas that we assess as low risk. And we assess those based on kind of the controls you have in place, plus our history with the municipality. It kind of gives us an assessment and just the overall nature of the transaction. So we look at your minutes of council to ensure that anything that's of a financial nature, that it's recorded in your financial statements appropriately. We do substantive testing. We look at sampling, we do analytical review, we look at management's estimates, make sure that they are all appropriate. And then we do obviously testing to the appropriate backup as well. We look at your systems, the main ones being payroll, your disbursements, payroll, journal entries. We look at the controls that are in place. We test those controls. We document the systems as well. Other items on the next page that we're required to communicate to council. The audit is complete pending council's approval of financial statements. And once that happens, then we will ask management to sign the management representation letter, as well as receipt of legal confirmations as well. And they should all be coming in shortly. We didn't have any significant difficulties encountered during the audit. No changes to what we actually audited or our audit plan. We didn't have any disagreements or difficulties with management. Excellent cooperation, all things considered, with staff. It was hard with COVID. We finished most of the field work just as COVID was kind of coming on board in March of 2020. But then we did have, and we talk about here, the delay due to the implementation of citywide for the tangible capital asset. So that was a big project for your staff to undertake to try to get all the capital assets into citywide. And there were definitely delays just with COVID, with the timing, with just the project. But I think overall, I know we're looking forward to the 2020 audit just because all that information will be there and be much easier for us to audit as well as for your whole team. Just the whole asset management plan, having all the assets all in one place and the recording will be really good for everybody involved for sure. And the last point there is we did not have any uncorrected audit differences. We are required to let you know if there are, and sometimes there are within materiality, but there were none for the 2019 audit. And now I will flip it over to Veronica, who will go through some of the numbers, and I'll come back after.
All right, so the next slide will show you your financial assets as at December 31st. So your financial statements are consolidated financial statements. So these do also include the balances for the library board and the BIA board as well. And just to give you a sense of what you're looking at here, 2019 is on the left-hand column, and that's the year that we're talking about right now. And then we've provided some previous years as well, just to give you a sense of the trends within the township over the past few years. So your financial assets at December 31st, you can see that, as always, your most significant financial asset is the cash that you have on hand in bank accounts. You do also have some investment balances, accounts receivable, which in this case includes quite a large amount of HST receivable at the end of 2019 due to rebates associated with the community center project, and your taxes receivable balance. So you do have total financial assets at the end of 2019 of 17.1 million. And then if you look at the next slide, that will show you the trend over the years as well as the relative sizes. So you can see your cash is there in green, and that's your largest asset. You can see again related to the community center project that some of that cash you had been setting aside was spent during 2019 to construct the community center. The next slide shows your financial liabilities as at December 31st. Your liabilities include accounts payable and accrued liabilities. So those are items that you've incurred before year end that are not, where payment is not due or payment is not made until after the year end date. You also have some deferred revenue in your obligatory reserve funds of about 4.5 million. That consists of about 4 million of development charges you have on hand for future projects, as well as some federal gas tax and parkland obligatory reserve funds as well. You do also have some liabilities that you don't need to fund currently. They're funded in the future as they are incurred, and those would be your employee future amounts payable. So that's any benefits, post-employment benefits, your long-term debt, and your landfill closure, post-closure liability. So you have financial liabilities at the end of the year of $15.3 million. And again, we have a slide that just shows you the sizes and the trends on the next slide. And there you can see your long-term debt is the largest balance there in, I guess it's brown. And you can see it just goes down a little bit every year as you make the regularly scheduled repayments. There's no new debt over the past few years. The next slide shows the first amount there, net financial assets. So that's your financial assets less your financial liabilities of about $1.8 million at the end of 2019. And then you also have some non-financial assets. The most significant thing being your amounts invested in tangible capital assets. So that is shown at net book value, which is your historical cost less any accumulated amortization up to the end of December 2019. And then you do have some other minor non-financial assets, some inventories of materials and supplies to be consumed in the future, as well as a little bit of prepaid expenses. So that $74.5 million at the bottom of the slide is your total accumulated surplus at the end of December. The next slide is your consolidated statement of operations. So the top part of the slide shows your revenues and expenses as are stated on the financial statements following the presentation required by PSAB. So you can see that your budget and your actuals do show an annual surplus there. And of course, when you're doing your annual budget, you're not creating a budget to those surplus numbers. So down at the bottom of the slide, we just provide a reconciliation to bring those numbers in line with what your actual operating surplus or deficit would be at the end of the year. And we do that by adjusting for items that either affect your surplus but not your operating budget, or vice versa. So those would be items such as the purchase of tangible capital assets, the amortization on capital assets, reserve transfers, and long-term debt payments being the most significant items. And then the next slide shows you your net book value of tangible capital assets in blue and how that compares to your accumulated surplus in orange. And like most municipalities, you're fairly heavily invested in your assets, especially your infrastructure. So you can see that the blue line is very, very close to the amount of the orange line. Most of that 74 million of accumulated surplus is invested in tangible capital assets. And then we have a chart that shows the total revenues each year, the total expenses, and the annual surplus. So again, this is stated on the same basis as in the financial statements for PSAB purposes. So you can see each year under PSAB, you're showing an annual surplus. And a lot of that is largely due to your additions in intangible capital assets each year, as they do show as an increase in your surplus until you amortize them over time. And then we get into a little more detail on your actual revenue and expense numbers. So this first slide is your revenues for the year. You can see that you had budgeted revenues of about 12.8 million and actual of about 15 million. There's a few I beg your pardon. I lost where I was. There's a few things that are a little over budget. The most significant one there, the province of Ontario, you did have some unexpected funding towards the beginning of 2019, after the 2019 budget was set, which was the provincial modernization funding, about $586,000. Also, the other line includes quite a few things that are quite difficult to budget for and that you would tend to budget conservatively for. So things like your investment revenue are showing there. You've got sponsorships, donations showing there. For the purposes of the slide, they're grouped together. They are broken out a little bit more separately on the actual financial statements. The following slide shows your revenues just broken down so you can see the relative sizes. So property taxation provides about 59% of your revenues, user charges 17%, and in 2019, the province of Ontario grants were about 8%. And then we can see your expenses for the year on the following slide. These ones are broken down by function. You can see that you had budgeted total expenses of about 12.2 million. The actuals came in at about 11.5, which is an increase over prior year, but came in below the 2019 budget. And we also have a slide to show the relative sizes of the functions. So I'm sure you're not surprised to realize that transportation services is your largest source of expenditures, about 28%. And also significantly, you have environmental services and protection. The following slide shows the same 11.5 million in expenses. These are just broken down by object, so you can see the types of expenses this time. And if we go to the next slide, then this one gives, can we go to the next slide, please? So this slide gives the percentage breakdown. So it's the same expenditures shown a different way. So you can see salaries and benefits at about 31%, contracted services at about 27% are your largest expenses. And then this is the point where I will turn the presentation back over to Joanna.
It's hard enough to listen to numbers. It's nice at least to split it up into the people. On the next slide is the accumulated surplus. So Veronica mentioned there's $74.5 million of accumulated surplus, and this shows the breakdown. And as she showed on the one slide, most of it is invested in your capital assets. And you see that on the first line, 60.2 million is invested in capital assets. And that's the net book value of the tangible capital assets that we saw in the statement of financial position, less the long-term debt associated with those assets, as well as unfinanced capital. So you do have about $4.6 million in unfinanced capital, most of that's the community center, which we funded in future years. Primarily, I think, from future development charges. So that's the 60.2 million made up of from the 74.5. The rest of the year accumulated surplus is as Veronica mentioned, the items that you don't need to fund until you're actually paying for them. That's the landfill should be just post-closure liability there, and then the employee future benefits. And then the Millbrook BIA also has a accumulated surplus of $53,000. The other amounts in the accumulated surplus are your reserves and reserve funds that are just under $15 million. Obviously, you can see that decrease there, which was planned in your budget to use part of your reserves and reserve funds this year. So that rounds out the accumulated surplus. And then on the next slide, we'll just see you can see the trend there in the surpluses, the reserves and reserve funds, and you can see the decrease there as planned to use your future capital reserves this year. And then the next slide, we looked at the tangible capital assets on the statement of financial position. This is just your total additions, and seeing the breakdown being the buildings and building improvements being the largest portion there of $10.7 million, most of that being the community center. And then even within the other categories, the equipment, the vehicles, a lot of that has to do with the community center as well. On the next slide, we look at the difference between your amortization and the tangible capital addition. So this is an important slide to kind of step back and look at the trends of. And you can see each year consistently you've been adding to your capital assets more than your amortization, which is what you want to do, at least on average, to ensure that you're replacing your assets at a higher rate, because the amortization is being done at the historical rate, whereas of course you're replacing them at the higher cost value. So this is what you want to see to make sure that you don't slip into that infrastructure deficit that seems to be talked about a lot. And then the next slide, we're just looking at overall what amount of average useful life is remaining in your assets. So the left-hand column is your total. So you can see overall 70% of the useful life of your assets in total is remaining. And then you can see it by category. So depending on the type of assets and how often you're replacing them, then the amount remaining. A lot of that has to do with the amount of useful life too. The longer lives is going to impact that. And then the following slide, we look at the net financial asset trends. And as we saw in the statement of financial position, the decrease there being the cash spent on the community center this year, which of course you've done some internal borrowing and be looking to future development charges to get that. So we'll see the trend change definitely over the next couple of years. And that is it for our presentation. We're happy to address any questions you may have.
Very good. Thank you very much, Veronica and Joanna. Any questions from members of council? Wow, impressive. I guess my first question is just expand on why we're dealing with the 2019s now as opposed to the 2020s. And my second question would be, what's our timeline to get the 2020 started, and when should we expect that to come back to council?
Good questions and expected questions, Mayor. It was really, there was a combination of many things. The actual audit itself for the non-capital assets section of the audit was done similar timing as it has been in the past. It was really to do with the capital assets and the transition. So there was a lot of work there being done by your consultant and by your treasurer as well to transfer all your assets into that new system, and then to look at the policies that were done. The one thing I failed to mention is that there is a restatement to the prior year numbers, and that has to do with when this project was done. You know, everything, you see the data differently, just trying to fine tune and get better numbers. So there was some change in the amortization policies, some in the assets. And so all that took time to get into the new system. And then we would get the information, we would audit it. There would be changes that needed to be made. We'd lots of back and forth. And of course, then when you have back and forth with a consultant, your treasurer and us, there's three parties and their timelines. And then throw COVID into that, there was just a delay in getting the information back and forth between all of us. It does seem like a long time. And I know Veronica and I were discussing this prior to our meeting that, it's hard to imagine that it could take that long, but when you get that many different parties and then all the different other delays, you're not our only 2019 financial statements that are still being presented, unfortunately, because all of the other municipalities have had issues. I shouldn't say all of them, but other municipalities have had delays as well. So just the timeline definitely threw a wrench into everything. As for the 2020 audit, though, we'll think positively here. We plan to start that audit this week or next for sure, and we're hoping to present in September to council, hoping that there's no issues there. But assuming there's no issues, then that is definitely our goal, and so that we can move on and get into and start looking at the 2021 audit soon.
Very good, excellent. Has there been any impact with regards to any funding that was not available because our audited statements weren't completed? Normally they're done, I think, June, July timeframe, and there typically is a rush to get them submitted so that we qualify for funding. I know with the pandemic and COVID, funding has been flowing out well, and we've certainly got an abundance, and we're certainly very appreciative of it. But was there opportunities that we were prevented from applying to?
Not that I'm aware of, but I would turn that over to your treasurer just to confirm. But I know the ministry obviously is looking for your FIR, but I'm not aware that there was anything that you missed out on. But I would speak to your treasurer on that one for sure.
Very good, Ms. Pope.
Thank you. We haven't missed out on any opportunities. The FIR and the MMAH is waiting for the financial statements and the FIR to be posted. We've kept them apprised of the situation, and they have been lenient through COVID with the municipalities. So we haven't been declined. We were definitely pushing this forward to ensure that we wouldn't have any future problems with future applications. We're very pleased today to receive the 2019 financial statements. And just a small point to note, I know you touched on the 2020, but we've already had 1 week in June of preliminary data exchange for the audit and a few ongoing questions. So we are actually started already on the 2020, just so that we can keep ahead and get a presentation back to council very quickly, which is anticipated for September.
Very good. Any other questions from members of council? Seeing none, those were the obvious ones that were going to get asked. It was just a matter of who. Sorry, I'm just looking. I don't see it. Don't we normally have a brief report, and in that report as the recommendations to receive the audited statements, as opposed to doing it directly out of the presentation? Or I guess Ms. Pope, do you want us just to receive them here and that's it?
Usually there's a reserve report update, but because the 2020 will have the audited 2019 and 2020, that is coming forward at the next at the meeting in September. However, in order for the auditors to proceed, Joanna, you need approval on the draft statements today, do you not?
Correct.
Right. So I'll just refer it to the clerk as opposed to how we go ahead and have that done with through the presentation at this point.
For you, Mayor McFadden, to Ms. Pope, is there any verbiage that we need in the actual motion, or can it just be that the presentation be received and the approval of the draft financial statements?
That, I believe, is all that's required. For Joanna, can you speak to that?
Yeah, just, the big thing would be to make sure that you clarify what year of the financial statements council is approving, but that would be adequate for sure.
The motion that I've currently prepared is that the presentation from Veronica Mason and Joanna Park for Baker Tilly for the 2019 financial statements and audit be received, and the approval for the draft financial statements. Mayor McFadden, would you like anything noted to include that the 2020 audit is anticipated to come back to council in September?
No, I think that part's fine, but I think at the very tail end of that motion, I don't have it in front of me, but I don't believe you said for approval of the audited statements, maybe just add in there the 2019, just because of the situation. I think yes. The 2019 was missing at the very end of that.
It was at the beginning, but we can put it at the end as well.
Yeah, just so everybody's perfectly clear. Okay, and Joanna and Veronica, did that motion sound, does that provide you with the clear direction you need in order to continue on?
It does. Thank you, Mayor McFadden.
Excellent. Very good. All right, I would entertain a mover from Deputy Mayor Graham and a seconder from Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you very much, Joanna and Veronica, and we will see you back very soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is delegations under 7.1, and our delegation is today from Al Steele.
For you, Mayor McFadden, Mr. Steele has joined us.
Very good. Welcome, Mr. Steele. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. Welcome. You are currently muted.
Am I there?
You are there. Welcome, Mr. Steele. The floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. For brevity's sake, I'm surprised that the previous one is what I did. For brevity's sake, I'm going to do a shortened version, and I'm going to use your page numbers to flip through the various charts. There is one correction that one of the unused slides, 111, should read Township staff deliver late 2022, 2023. And that was from recent information that I've received. But the purpose of today is trying to re-engage the township with whomever or whatever to get meaningful dialogue and action for the ORV constituents in the township, and pose the question, waiting for the TMP, is it a reasonable reason to delay Cavan Ward? Slide 110, please. The want for legal road use is here. No matter how you want to calculate it, at least a 2-to-1 majority of Cavan Ward respondents want the roads opened. By the number of helmets and machines, when you open garages to the newly built across the entire township, the want is growing. Yes, there are those that say, I really don't care. And it's probably the largest portion of the population. But when push comes to shove, they really don't want to lose the right to ride in the future. Most of us living here are here for the rural experience, and RVing is one of the province's largest growing sectors. A gesture in good faith was offered by Council November 2nd. The community delivered on all it was asked and more, but nothing has happened. Slide 113, please. A concern was raised by the ORV community, and it has to do with viewing the county council meeting of June 2nd, where the draft ORV plan was to be presented, but wasn't yet again. It slipped once again. And the plan's completion has been pushed out until the end of the year at the earliest. As well, it's been learned that the ORV plan is really focused on linkages, not usage and not township roads. As the county staff told us, those are the township's issues. Hearing this, 8 well-respected Cavan Ward residents from all corners of the ward penned a letter to council to save the riding season, improve the safety of ORV use, both on roads and off roads, decrease conflicts with others, and paint a clear direction forward in the township. They wanted to open dialogue now. However, council dismissed the letter in its entirety. These residents, reasonable people doing reasonable community things in good faith. Slide 114, please. With me, this has always been about health and safety. I am still not a ORV owner. It's about health, getting people of any ability outside doing something, good for the body and good for the mind, especially during COVID. And about safety, slowing down riders on the roads and off the roads, education, right equipment, no alcohol, no drugs, rules of riding and training, how to do it right, not DIY. What's in place today in the township didn't work a decade ago. It didn't work for last council, and it's not working today. It's time to try a new approach to ORVs. Just saying no doesn't solve the problem. It's not going to go away. Reasonable people are asking reasonable for something that similar townships have. They're fed up waiting in the dark, waiting to see what else new is going to be added to the list of things they need to do. They want to establish meaningful two-way dialogue that is in good faith and for the whole community. Slide 109, please. Bill 107 was brilliant in many ways, but what was more impressive were the lower tier townships that took and embraced the opportunities contained in it. Townships rewrote their bylaws to open roads to ORVs while helping mitigate liability, educate the community, and ensure lifestyle enhancement. The use of a Ontario Reg 316/03 Section 24 clause and a clawback clause for lost costs and damages help greatly reduce cost risks, as does education, all which aren't happening here today. My ask today is for commitment to put a mechanism in place now where the community and township can come together to build a move forward plan balancing stakeholder needs, just as other similar municipalities have done, to address health and safety issues and get things going now. The county ORV needs this information, or the county or the township may be excluded from its benefits. The user community wants to work with the township, but in the past, it has been a painful exercise in futility. The community wants to work to change this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steele. Any questions from members of council? Seeing none, I guess I did want to add, not to confuse the matter, but Cavan, the township of Cavan-Monaghan is one of the only municipalities that has actually done something. Those that their roads are open, not necessarily because they've done something. Havelock, Belmont, Methuen, and Peterborough County is certainly an exception, but the remainder, they haven't done anything. That's why their roads are open. So it's not from their outgoing pouring of all of the time and efforts that they've put into it. They've just elected not to do anything. Cavan-Monaghan has chosen to maintain status quo pending the outcome of the Transportation Master Plan. And I recognize that not all members of the community appreciate that approach. That is the approach the council has taken, and we are awaiting the outcome of the Transportation Master Plan and the ORV section specifically, which is a committee of council at the county that I do sit on. And as I've been instructed on multiple occasions, as recently as last week, that will be coming back in the fall, and they're expecting to have that dealt with by the end of the year. So I know that's not the answer that you were looking for, Mr. Steele, it is an update. That's where things are at. And I know council has put an enormous amount of time into this topic, and it hasn't necessarily resulted in the outcome that you may have preferred. If there's no other questions from members of council, then a motion to receive the delegation. Deputy Mayor Graham, second. Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you, Mr. Steele, for your delegation. Next item on the agenda is item 8.1, minutes of the regular council meeting held June 21st, 2021. Motion. Deputy Mayor Graham, second. Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
and Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item, minutes from the committees or boards. Mr. Hack Advisory Committee meeting was held June 17th. Motion for those minutes. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item, 9.2, Cabot Public Library Board meeting minutes, May 18th, 2021. Motion for those minutes. Councillor Moore and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item, 10.1, Report Finance 2021-12-2022, Budget Schedule and Council Schedule. Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, to Council, we have before you the 2020 timetables, both the council meeting schedule and the budget timetable. We do have one amendment to propose, as we normally bring forward a report in December annually. That's the first special budget meeting to amend this year's, the 2021, to include that date, which is Thursday, December 9th, 2021, starting at 9 a.m. But all the other details are in the attached for council's consideration and approval today.
Very good. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Pope. I noticed that the due date for staff to submit for capital projects and that starts in August, I believe is what it is. But sitting on a number of different boards, like they're not even around for the summer, so they won't even have a chance to submit in that one. So is there a timeline specifically for the different boards and committees that for their projects to be done? Because I know with both BIA and in Mr. Hack, we kind of tend to scramble towards the end of the year. So I'm just wondering whether, putting out a tentative deadline or some sort of guidance for those boards, might be appropriate in this case.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Huntley. It's actually, I distribute the documents to staff in August. It's the end of September that staff report back to us. We have had leniency to wait for the first meeting in October, usually for the BIA and the library, to receive theirs after the fact. And that's to prep for the upcoming meetings so that we can develop and be back before council for that first week in December. If there are any changes throughout as we're having the meetings, etc., those updates are always well received right up until we hit November. So that is the first submission, but it doesn't mean it's the only submission. So if there are additional details, they can provide those throughout the time in which we have our meetings with them, when the budget committee is also considering, and right up until roughly about mid-November, so that I can get those changes in and as part of the first draft for that first meeting in December. So, the deadline isn't as close to August as originally perceived. It's September or into the beginning of October for boards.
Okay.
Very good. Any further questions from members of council? Motion then to receive that report and accept the recommendation. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Moore, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item, 10.2, Report Finance 2021-13, Financial Review of Future Capital Infrastructure Projects. Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to all of council. This is a summary report based on the various reports that council has received with much more detail about the actual projects themselves. So this is basically to take a look at what if scenario we went forward with all three where we're sitting with our annual repayment limit. Was it affordable? What funds we had in development charges, reserves, etc., and how much potentially could be borrowed. So no decisions have been made as far as this report, but this is to bring the information forward to council. So I'm just going to walk through my report just slightly here to give a bit of an overview. So if we could just move down a little bit there to the Greenview Environmental, staying on the first page, please. Sorry about that. Just moving down a little bit there. So basically, the three various projects that are before you that are considered in this report do total about $12 million. That's 6.9 at the fire station being located at the municipal office site, 3.7 million if the Public Works Operations Center is located at the north location. And there was a third item included in Greenview's analysis, so we've also included it in this report also, of a $1.5 million costing to build a Parks and Public Works building. Greenview did indicate in previous reports to council through management that there is a potential 10% savings that could be realized in a consolidated tender, but it does not mean that all three must go forward for that to occur. It was looking at initially the first two largest infrastructure projects. If we just go down to page 2, please. This is just a summary in case council wants to go back, look at any of the reports or any of the details pertaining to some of the specifics of each of these projects. And this was in summary. However, there was a motion at the June 21st meeting that council passed that council was approving the site selection for the replacement of Fire Station 1 on the identified lands located at 988 County Road 10 based on the site selection study that was provided at that time. We'll continue down to financial impact. So the ARL, which we often mention here for the municipality, it's called the annual repayment limit. And it's basically an allocation where we're allowed to use and spend our funds based on our revenues. This is a 25% of our revenues, which is permitted to be paid towards debt. Currently, we are using approximately 18% of the entire annual repayment limit on the 3 OILC debentures we have for the water, wastewater, remembering that one of those debentures is the development charges portion to be repaid back as the development charges are coming in every single year. So that 18% is what we're currently using, so there's definitely room. In summary, I've just put the three projects side by side here that represent that $12.5 million, being the fire station, the Public Works Operating Center, and the Parks and Public Works building. And just showing you there, if we were to borrow, I used a 25-year principle using OILC rates previously with some indexing just to give you a rough estimate. But in the fire station example, we have about $2.4 million available through the DCs. There is a little bit in the asset replacement reserve of $7,356. And then council has set aside funding in the past number of budgets, and there is a reserve for the fire hall of about $1.6 million. So looking at the full price tag at $6.9 million, we would need to borrow approximately $2.8 million if we were to proceed with that project. The Public Works Center, we have about $714,000 in development charges or will be available to us, $22,000 in the asset replacement reserve, and therefore we would need to borrow approximately the $2.9 million before you. The Parks and Public Works building had not been included in previous development charge studies. We don't have any funding there, and it hasn't historically had funds set aside through any of the previous budgets. However, because we are opening up the volume flows for the water, wastewater, and the development charges to remove the 10% legislated change where we no longer have to discount for that, I've spoken with our consultants, and there is the ability for us to include in this period of time an update and include if there is an expansion aspect to the Parks and Public Works building. And it's my understanding there's about a 50% expansion aspect. So there is potential that half of what we go forward with may be available to be placed into development charges. However, at this point in time, it's not in the current study and not showing before you. We can go down to the next page. This is giving you a little bit of a summary of the debentures to date, just showing how much annually we're paying. I did emphasize the DCs. That's that $327,000 being paid annually. That does not come from the tax rate. It does not come from the water and wastewater user fees. That comes from the DCs and flows back through there. But the first two components that does come through the user fees, the 127,000, the 53,000, and annually that has been budgeted since we started. You can see there when we signed, we had 30-year debentures at 3.33%, according to the bylaws that existed there. So then I'm looking just a little bit down below on the potential future debentures. And if we are looking at the 25 years using an estimated 2.84%, annually we would be repaying, if all three projects were considered at the same time, about $409,000. So therefore, this is where I was talking about currently we're using 18% of the ARL used for the three water wastewater debentures. If we were to add that additional 14%, or the 409,000, it would add an additional 14% to our ARL. And overall, all those debentures added together would use approximately 32% of Cabin Monaghan's annual repayment limit. There are some assumptions and factors included within this report, and they are listed there below for council's information. But basically, there's no sponsorship or fundraising considered. You would see that being different from when we launched the CMCC financial details. No additional developer paid contribution other than through development charges. Primarily that's because sometimes the developer will want to come in and partner with us if it's a shared road or somehow is a cost savings for them. So at the time of this report, there was no understanding of that being available. So that's not included. And we are using maximum available DCs as per the current study in place. I've used 2020 interest rates with indexing, and we are using the OILC industry rates. There are debts that we could consider 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, but for the example and purposes of this report, we stayed consistent with 25 years just for calculations. Operating costs for each of the proposed buildings is not available and not included in this report. This is about the capital cost of these buildings. There's no land acquisition costs considered in this report. And the budgetary cost estimates are based on the Greenview review, and they have included an allowance for design, engineering, construction, tendering, and OBC general review for all the preliminary sites and building scope with a 20% contingency. Can we move forward, please? We are looking at a potential grant component under the FCM Green Municipal Funds. This would provide a loan. It's an option. Instead of going through OILC, we could also go through them instead. The advantage, if we could, is that there's a 15% grant component for whatever portion that you borrow from. So if this were applicable and the fire station debenture was really $2.8 million, a 15% grant component could realize a grant of $428,504. However, they are specific that it has to be some type of a green municipal fund change to improve air, water retrofitting, construction, a land and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So in working with the fire chief and also our consultant, that's still being reviewed. There hasn't been a definite answer on that as of yet to say what we could or could not do, but we wanted to ensure that you knew that we are looking at it, and if there is a potential, we would definitely try to apply and receive that grant funding as well. So attached is the debt capacity calculation ratios, just showing some of the information that's included within the report in a schedule with the water wastewater expansion that we already have in place and the community center, which was not borrowed externally for any of the projects, just showing them side by side so you could see. Just want to highlight that $4.8 million in the 20-year debenture, again, is DCs, and you see down below that they're identified as DCs as part of the funding formula. So this is the report for council to consider and also to provide staff direction on the funding and direct us to proceed with tendering process where applicable.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Pope. Questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you. It's through you, Mayor. Thanks for the report, Kimberly. Really interesting, financial strategy, and I really appreciated the clarity and simplicity of it being laid out for that. A couple of questions with regards to the various channels in which we might be able to finance or loan for these projects. You mentioned a few. I'm just curious with regards to the flexibility for these types of debentures to be paid back ahead of schedule. So should certain, revenue streams come available, or, should we have a, knock on wood, a surplus that should occur in a given year, obviously it would make sense to utilize some of those funds towards, addressing some of the debts that we have or might take on. I guess with regards to the opportunities or the potential, funding for these, is there certain options that have more restrictions or less restrictions historically for that sort of flexibility? Because obviously, if the opportunity presents itself, we'd like to pay off these loan accumulating or interest accumulating debts sooner than later.
That's definitely a very good question. The Green Fund, because we have not applied there before, it isn't a fund that I'm 100% familiar with. I will definitely take your comments into consideration and compare them to OILC. That is the one that we did engage, and we do have information there. I can at least do a comparison, but at this time, we haven't reached out to them because we're trying to determine if we're even eligible under that program because of the greenhouse gases. But you make a very valid point, and I'll definitely review that as we move forward and determine and bring that back to council when we do report another time to council.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I just think it behooves us to have that consideration as well. I'm sure there's other comments, but with regards to the report in general, like I said, I fully endorse receiving the report and figuring out how we're going to approach these things once the tender process is done. And I know that some of these projects are substantial in nature. My 2 cents right now is that the absence of that the Millbrook Yard being recognized in the DC charges bylaw, and you mentioned you made reference to the update. I'm in full support of growth related projects being funded by the revenue of growth from DC charges that they're intended to fulfill. So I'm not in favor of moving forward with that project until it's recognized in the appropriate level that DC charges can be allocated to it, because otherwise it's an over draw on the existing taxpayers for growth related infrastructure. So that's where I'm at on that one. But with regards to the other two, I fully support in engaging in this sort of approach when the time comes and getting the process started. But I think I'm also a bit concerned with regards to these forecast numbers that we have in the overview with regards to these projects. In my recollection from the consultants' reports, these are all at the very high end of those potential costs for those different projects. I think in every case, these are the higher end numbers. And I'm sure I'm not the only one on council that's probably going to have a comment to say, well, if we're, asking for people to, taking these projects to tender and doing so at the highest forecasted price, I don't think it's maybe it's awfully optimistic to expect that people will come in at what they actually could be provided in. So it would be my suggestion that we at least consider proceeding with those tenders at the lowest forecasted price that have been provided by the consultant, but I'm sure there will be much to discuss.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was just going to, just for clarification, and this is new information, because I just had the same conversation with Ms. Pope relative to the Millbrook Yard and the development charges. So the new information, if I understand correctly, Ms. Pope, is because the development charge background study is being opened right now for water wastewater, that we will be able to incorporate the Millbrook Yard costing capital infrastructure monies into that, so it can be reflected and can be recovered. I don't know whether that helps, Deputy Mayor, but I share the same concern, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Pope, that we're okay?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify just your comment. You're absolutely correct that it is the water wastewater infrastructure project. It has to do with the timing of the payments, but it's also at the same time being opened up because of the 10% legislative change, which does affect more than water wastewater. It actually affects parks and rec, library, and studies. And so that 10% where we used to not be allowed to collect for those dollars, they're coming off, and those amounts are going back in for the legislative change. So that's also happening at the same time. And I did confirm with the consultant that they are able to include new infrastructure projects that weren't previously provided before in this updated report as well.
And through you, Mayor, and just in response to that, Kimberly, are you able to give a rough estimate as to what the DC eligibility for this project would be, given that information?
So provided that the actual building itself is increasing in size. So if you're going from a
Yep.
2-bay to a 4-bay,
Growth
there's a
related.
50%. So the 50% portion could be considered for the DCs, but not the
So-
initial replacement portion.
And with regards to this project, I'm assuming we just haven't done that calculation yet, but I'm just looking, if anyone has a rough estimate, just to put it in perspective, I'm just curious.
So if you had if it really was a $1.5 million capital build and half of it was
Mhm.
growth related, there'd be the potential for the 750,000.
Yeah, so best case 700-ish. Yeah, okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Pope. Thanks again for the presentation. It's been quite informative, especially in the information on the debenturing. But I kind of echo Deputy Mayor Graham's view on how we tender this. Like, we know that the estimates, well, they are obviously on the high side. We know that. We know that there's a 25% contingency, not 20% contingency built into it, according to the one chart. I mean, it's just high. And I thought in our last discussions, there were things that could potentially be covered by different areas. So I'm leery of going to the street with a high-end cost or the high-end price, when we know there's things that could be, jiggled a little bit differently. So I'm just curious on how can we get a closer cap when we go out to tender? And, is the option of actually doing an RFI before going to full tender a possibility?
So that is a great question. If I can say this much, when we're looking at the actual costing, there was a low and a high, and you are absolutely correct. In this report, it was brought forward to bring forward the high. What's the maximum that we're looking at? If you recall, when we went out to tender for the CMCC, the $15 million price tag that we initially thought would happen, it came in over budget because it came in 2.4 over. So we had a $17.4 million capital project. Not because there was bad planning, it was a change in the market and what happened with the cost. And I remember council even questioned that back in the day, whether or not the consultant had perhaps misidentified or not included enough, and it really wasn't. It was the market. I don't propose necessarily that we go to market with our highest price. This is more for discussion to allow council to see the maximum that we're thinking is based on the consultant's review and what the consultant is saying. And in addition, adding that Parks and Public Works building, because the consultant looked at it, it would not be proper for me to bring forward a report and omit a piece that council did not give me authority to omit.
Mhm.
So what I've done is I brought forward what Greenview has taken a look at. I've presented it to you today in sort of a worst case scenario at the highest end. But there's absolutely, I don't set the priority and I don't determine the choices that are made. Therefore, they're all here for your consideration. And if you want to go forward with a tendering process at a lower value, that is 100% within the realm of council's choice. As far as doing an RFI, I know with the community center, and I might have to lean on the CAO but I believe it was an RF.
Q?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
list of qualified. I'm sorry, I can't remember the list of qualified firms. List of qualified firms that could come forward. That was the first portion, and then only those firms could actually put in a tender. So for the CMCC. So sorry, I've just drawn a blank on the terminology.
Well, that's okay. So through you, Chair, just to follow up with that, I guess, lessons learned from the CMCC was that the township took it on the nose, the change and the risk of a price increase, right? And I believe, if we do this properly, we can transfer that risk, and we should be transferring that risk to whoever signs up for these projects. And I think we should take extra special caution when we contract this or when we tender it, to make sure that whatever we set as the limit is the limit.
It was brought forward back to council at the time when the $17.4 million price tag came in, and there was quite a in-depth discussion as to where and why. I think if I recall correctly, I think the timelines between receiving the estimates, and then actually going forward with the project, we're further out than what we're dealing with this year, unless council made a decision today to not go forward in another couple of years or put off one of the projects. Of course, that would be different. So I think our timelines are definitely tighter. And in no way, I mean, if it comes back to council and it does come in over whatever the value is that council has set, there's no obligation to move forward at that price. You know, if again, that's up to council to consider whether or not there's ways around it or changes. And even if when it's presented or placed out for tender, if there are components, if I recall correctly, things like the walking track and things like that, they were separately identified so that if council wanted to subtract or add, they had a few components that they could maneuver around to work with what they wanted to do at that time. So I would perceive that the same would be available to us this time around.
Well, through you, Chair, with all due respect, though, I don't think what we're looking for is de-scoping items to get back into a budget. We're looking for protection on market fluctuations. Right. So I think the scope is clear. What we want to tender for is clear, and it's not a matter of removing the bay to make it fit the dollars anymore. Right. And I think, as part of that tendering process, we need to potentially protect ourselves, and be able to not tender if they don't come in at budget, not descope. Descoping isn't a way to fix it, right? And that doesn't provide us with any risk protection.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Huntley. These are all good questions, and obviously, as we move forward, we'll ensure that we do the best we possibly can on this process, should council wish to go forward with them. I think it's, as we mentioned before, we were budgeting for Greenview to actually do the tender for us, and put those types of conditions within that tender document to ensure that we're getting the best that we possibly can. So staff was not drafting this, nor did we draft the last one for the CMCC as well. We hired the professionals that deal with this every day, and they're the ones that do it. If there's something specific we want to ensure that we have, absolutely, we take that. We'll take your comments forward, and we'll provide them to Greenview as they draft the tender documentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. I guess, with the CMCC, we were not protected when it came to price fluctuations, and as good a job as MGM did, they didn't take any of the risk, even though they claimed they did. We paid for the risk, and I don't want to see a repeat of that.
Well, I think that's something we can take under consideration. The last tenders that we've done, when it comes down to that, and even getting into some legal situations that we understand that the risk does come back on the municipality. So we did get legal review of that, actually, and it was what it was, and there was some risk that the municipality at the end of the day were required. Even if you modified that tender, we legally were advised that we did everything we possibly could, but those risks, and specifically some of them that identified, and one particular was one was in a bankruptcy situation. So there was many factors that went into that, but we did seek legal advice, Councillor Huntley, throughout that entire process.
Okay.
So I think it's fair to state with all members of council, we recognize the importance of updating each of those projects, the infrastructure. They're long overdue. It's not a question of when, it's now. We got to get moving ahead on these, and I know that's not a question. I know that council's not playing with that. We're down to the pricing. We have concerns with being, for lack of a better word, gouged in the process. We see other projects around that come in at very reasonable prices. So I'm good with sending out an RFP. I just want to have a tender. I just want to have that amount that I'm comfortable with, or the council is comfortable with, set such that if it comes in at that or lower, I'm comfortable with moving ahead. If it comes in higher, then it's going to have to come back to council for consideration of whether we're willing to increase our costs and, in a sense, buffer our risk. If something comes in over, we don't have to accept the tender. We can haul off the horses and pull her all back and not proceed. But I think independently, each of those three projects, I'd like to see us moving ahead with a tender on those three and put it out to market and see where it comes back. And I think that number should be something that we're comfortable with, that if it comes in, obviously we're going to be moving ahead. So if other councillors are ready to make that commitment, I know I am, because we've talked about it for quite some time, and all things being above board, we need to commit to these projects if we're going to have them started in such a time that it's prior to the inevitable election, which will be upon us soon enough. And I would hate to see any of these projects shelved for another council to make that determination. I know we're all committed to trying to move ahead. So with that, as if other members of council wish to speak, I know I'm certainly prepared to stick a dollar amount on each one and send them off to tender if other members of council are prepared to support it. My suggestion for the works yard, or for the Public Works Operations Center, would be 1.2 million. The fire hall would be 4 million, and the Millbrook Works Yard, now that we've identified the DCs, will be applicable through this process, and we can recover up to half. I'd suggest that would be 750,000. They're considerably less than what the high ranges were that were previously proposed. But I'll tell you straight up, if we get offers in at those prices, I'm certainly prepared to move ahead with those projects.
Are you making that motion? Or somebody to make that
I'll look to you. I'm putting it out there so we've got something to discuss. If you want to move it and second it, that's Councillor Moore.
Through your chair, how do we just pick a number out of the hat like that? Like you're saying 4 million for the fire station. Like we aren't qualified personally, or at least I know I'm not, to know the cost. And I mean, I know we got to be more reasonable than almost $7 million if we can be, but for the fire station in particular. But we also have to look at it that this is a long-term benefit to the township, and we want to know that it's going to stand up for the next 20 years. And if we start cutting corners before we even start, I don't know that that's going to happen. Just my opinion.
Yep.
I just don't know. I mean, because we're talking cutting almost $3 million off of just the one item there. Like
I know the low number on the fire hall is 4.7, if I had read that correctly, but I also know that there is certain contingencies that are built into that. I'm not suggesting cutting off bays. I'm not suggesting cutting off functionality or the service or the quality of it. What I'm suggesting is if that was put in, it doesn't prevent anybody from coming in at 4.7, but just in my past experience with every tender that we put through, I don't recall anybody coming significantly under. If we put in at 4.7 and that's what we're looking to get, it's pretty much par for the course. Everything's coming in 4.7 or higher. That's just been my history on it. Quite frankly, with regard to the renovations that have taken place at the township office, I was very impressed with the outcome of that. It appeared to be a low ball that went in at $400,000. And if you look around the offices of the work that's been completed, it was literally 1/3 of the highest bidder that came in through that process. And I think it's been a fantastic experience. So I think I do honestly believe those numbers are fair. We may or may not hit them, but if they're above that, it doesn't leave us any, we can certainly come back and revisit those that are above. Councillor Huntley?
Just a clarification, I believe the low range of the fire hall is actually 4.15, not 4.7. So your 4 million isn't that far off.
Oh, sorry. Thanks for picking that up. That was my bad. Thought it was 4.7. Okay. Well, there, we just reeled it in.
Yeah.
Another $600,000 off for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the 1.2 is based on other local projects that I'm aware of that came in that range as opposed to the significantly higher that we've seen. And I think some work needs to be done to understand what those other projects were and whether those would fit our needs. There's certainly a want and a need. But I do believe, I firmly believe that we can get the works done for those prices in light of other projects that have been done. Deputy Mayor Graham?
Yeah, I was just going over those numbers as well, and I see where Councillor Huntley is getting at. So I'm just doing the math in my head based on those lower rates. So if we said that 4.155, I believe the other project was 1. There's a few different options for these different projects, so I just don't want to get it wrong. But so maybe it would be better to ask staff for a summary of what those lowest forecasts would be, and then provide that just to confirm each of those projects with us so that we're aware of it. And then if we want to make an adjustment after the fact, at least we know what we're basing it off of in comparison to the lowest forecast. Is that I don't know which member of staff would like that.
We got a hand up over there with Ms. Pope. I don't know whether it was for that, but she's going to get handed off the baton here real quick. Ms. Pope, go ahead.
I thought if we could just direct down to the attachments, the summaries I did attach to the report. I know you've got a ton of details of the other reports, but just to try to help with this process, let's go down one more page. Okay, and if we could, this is for the new fire hall. If we could, yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you. So the first section there, it's the base CC site, the 988 County Road 10, which is used in this report. Let me just pull that up. Yeah, for the 6.9. So if we go down to the bottom of that, keep going down to the bottom. Thank you. And if we could scroll in, just because my eyes are hard to see that. I don't know about anybody else's. So that's 6.9 million there being at the top end, and the 4.1 million being at the lower end. I think that's what you're referencing, Mayor, when you talk about the 4 million. I don't know if you want to say 4.155 or 4.2, but am I correct that that would be the number that you're looking at?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So council, in looking at those two, we're just looking at the low range, using the same information that I provided in the report, except that I grabbed the high range for the worst case scenario. So that's the one. If we go to the next page, just for clarification on the rates. So, and if we could scroll in there a little bit, that's great. Thank you. So it was the the north location, Public Works, at the 3.7 million. Again, that being the higher construction cost using 20% contingency, as they say there in notes 1 and 2. It does have only the construction cost at the 3 million. That's the one that was used in this report for the 3.7. And then to the right of that is the Parks and Public Works building summary, where it really went from 1 million to the 1.5 million, depending on if you're including the 20% contingency or not. So maybe it's this page here, maybe for some clarification on the other numbers that we could discuss.
Councillor Huntley?
Just through you, Chair, just for clarification, when we construct the tender, are we using the low end numbers as guidance or the criteria for the tender?
We don't usually propose or tell what we require. It's more that this is a public process and they'll search out this information to see the upper limits that council is willing to go to.
So to my point then at that, I mean, these documents are already published and the upper and the lower limits are already, out there. So how do we convey within the tender that we're looking for that bottom end number, not the top end number? Otherwise, this discussion really is meaningless, because the people are going to reply with whatever they're going to reply with anyway.
I'm going to refer that to the CAO and the development of the tender with the consultant.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Huntley. Councillor Huntley, you are correct. I mean, obviously, as a municipality, we have to have a benchmark of what our project costs are going to be, whether they're low or, estimated between low and high. When we do the tender, we're benching two things. One, your tender we can identify some specifics that we're making, looking for the best possible cost. I don't know, we'd have to have that clarification within there. But what you're talking about here is actually about your construction costs, what you're estimating this build to be. I think what we're saying is we're looking to get something at the lower range than the higher range so that we know what our budget is going to be. But as for the tender document, the tender, you'll issue the tender based on the drawings, right? You'll issue the tender based on what the project is, and you'll see what that rate comes at. Can they see these documents? Yes, but they have to, because they're public.
Through you, Chair, but I guess within the tendering process itself, can we not say, if you aim at that top number or above that top number, you need not apply?
That's skewing it.
I can't answer that, Councillor Huntley. I'd have to defer to Tyler, who potentially does these tenders all the time, of what type of language we can put in the tender document to ensure that we're looking. I mean, we've always put in there, we want different options. Say, for instance, we want an option between steel and wood, for example. There's certain criteria you can put in a tender document that specify option A versus option B, which would give you a different price range. And, you know, I'm not sure more than what I can state over that at this time regarding that document.
So through your chair to continue that, I mean, where I'm going with this is, I mean, is we can have in our, what we want to design our budget around quite easily in this conversation, but as soon as the tender is released, it's completely out of our control unless we put some sort of mechanism in it to control it.
And what I'm saying to you through you, Mr. Chairman, is through Councillor Huntley, of course, I'm not sure what that language is at this time. I would ask you to give us what you're looking for or some of the language that you would like to see. And if it's just basically you want a lower end price or you want it something, like give me some language and I'm happy to go back and talk to them about what we can actually put in a tender document to ensure that those type of mechanisms are in there. But I can't answer that directly of what that's going to look like at this time.
Fair enough.
Councillor Moore?
And through your chair, and I know this isn't apples and oranges, but is this not the same as putting a tender out for a snowplow? We tell them what we expect to get on that snowplow. We put the tender out and the top 3 people that apply or whatever, we decide between them. But we don't tell them, don't apply if you're not going to meet this dollar. We tell them that you have to qualify for all the items we're asking for and then tell us what the cost is going to be. Is that not the way we usually do it? Like we tell them we want certain things on their plow, whatever it may be for the drivers, the GPS, whatever it is. But it's the same thing. We need to tell them what we expect in this building or these buildings. And then they have to come back and tell us what their cost is. And then we get to choose between them. I don't think we can dictate to them that they have to make it happen or God knows what they build it out of.
I think ultimately, as long as they, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Hurley, but I believe as long as they come in under what we've set as our upper maximum, that we'd be forced into entering a contract to actually do it. Now, if we set, I'm just making a number up, but we set something to be $1 million and they come in at 1.1, then it's back to council. The flexibility says, well, we're not going to pay it, so thanks, but no thanks. So they can bid and say $3 million, and we've said upper limit is 1. Then it's back to the flexibility of this council to determine. But if they come in at 900,000 and they've met all the requirements, then we're moving ahead. So I think in essence, if we're setting the amount that we're comfortable with, we have to be prepared that if they come back at those numbers or less, that we're going to have to accept them. So we need to specifically establish in those tender documents exactly what it is that we're looking for. In other words, whether the 3 bays or 4 bays or whatever those details are, so that it is what we're looking for. So I think there's a lot of language that needs to be put into the tender to make sure we're getting what we're asking. But I to your point, I don't think you can prevent somebody from bidding $10 million on any one of these projects. It's just they have to realize that it's probably time wasted. That right. Deputy Mayor Graham, sorry, you've been patient.
No problem. No, I was going to say the same thing, Mayor. It's just that my expectation is without a threshold, you remove the municipality's ability to not be bound to whatever the outcome of the tender process is, right? And I think that's what we're all trying to mitigate the risk of, is not, have to be bound to that. So I guess I have a question, and maybe twofold question is, one, is establishing a collective limit for all 3 projects of assistance to staff in moving forward with the tender process, because there's been a conversation with Greenview about the potential discount for combining 2 to 3 of these projects in conjunction. But then my follow-up question to that would be, are we able to structure the tender in that we can, if contractors or builders are so interested, to provide a competitive bid, like for instance, say there's a contractor who specializes in fire hall construction, and their bid, but they don't do public works construction. So they could specifically bid and potentially provide the most competitive bid from their expertise on that one project, but not the other 3. Obviously, we would want, as a municipality, the opportunity to execute on that tender without being bound to, to save 10% for having to go with one provider should that opportunity present. So I want to make sure that flexibility is there too.
Ms. Pope, sorry, your hand was up, but it was before Deputy Mayor Graham asked his question. So you might have a question or a response to something else. Go ahead.
I do, and thank you for that. I'm just in the discussion that we've had so far about the tenders, there's usually a budget process where council's given that pre-authority for a certain dollar value to be included on any of the capital works, whether it be in public works or purchase of a vehicle. So you're correct. When it goes out to tender, if it's less than that value, we would move forward with the most appropriate vendor or proponent that's submitted that meets all the qualifying factors. If it went over, there are times we don't go forward with it at all because, well, we definitely didn't have the budget for it. Or there's modifications. So sometimes in the roads, there's changes in the certain lengths or kilometers or what have you. That's always reported to council when the report from the tender comes forward. So that information is given. Please remember, in these particular projects here, I do not have any authority or any approval of council on any dollar value on any of the above. So I do not have a capital budget that indicated it's going to be X amount of dollars to do any of these projects. So if you want to set an upper limit, I think it's important that it's in documentation somewhere, because at this point, there's consultants saying this is what they think it'll be upper and lower, but there's no budget document that gives us that constraint that you're used to working within. So I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair. So in a situation like this, Ms. Pope, then there's absolutely no authorization to go forward with a project depending on the tender. It would have to come back to council regardless.
At this point, staff does not have any approval to go forward on any of these projects. Council has asked for staff to bring back reports and the costing estimates from the consultants, which they have, and to provide you with a financial analysis based on the consultants' estimates, which is what you're seeing today. But there's no report from council or motion of council, sorry, following any report indicating, yes, we're proceeding and this is the dollar value.
So what's the last part of your recommendation, which is and direct staff to proceed to the tendering process? So you're looking for us to send you to the tendering process without giving you an upset limit. So no matter what, you're going to have to bring it back. I've never heard of a tender work that way.
No, the first part is that council provides staff direction on the funding. So what is the funding as presented? Do you agree with the higher end that we've provided, the lower end? Do you agree with, you said earlier, you don't agree with going forward with the Parks and Public Works building unless there were development charges applied. And in the current funding formula you see before you today, it doesn't have it there. So it's direction from council as to where are we going? Because now staff have provided the details, the costing estimates, a financial comparison granted at the maximum. Where do you want to go from here?
So back to Councillor Huntley's question is, we are providing a number and providing direction to go to the tender process. So as long as the numbers come in at equal or less than those numbers, then it would not be coming back to council for approval. We'd be moving ahead with it if they came under.
If they meet the full matrix, which is more than just a dollar value, then I would agree. But at the same time, all reports from tenders come back to council. We just don't move forward without council's awareness. So I believe there would be a follow-up report. I don't believe it would just go forward. However, if there's a vendor that's met all the qualifying material or qualifications, I'd have to leave that to the legal aspect of whether you could pull out or not at that point. I think it was very difficult to do at that point, but the CIO would have better information on that regard.
All right. Yeah, sorry, that's more or less what I was trying to say. I will come back, but as far as our ability to pick and choose, as long as they've met all the criteria and are under budget, it'd be pretty difficult to exit out at that point. So any numbers that we choose today, council needs to be comfortable moving ahead at that price to be safe. Absolutely. Okay. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Graham, did I see your hand again?
Well, I was again reiterating the same point as you, Mayor, that I find it hard to believe that there would be any circumstance of a tendering process that we wouldn't be bound to accept the lowest tender. I mean, I would be, if I was bidding, I'd be pretty annoyed if that was the possibility of the case, and I don't think legally it would even be a possibility. I mean, if you're looking, I've been doing a little bit of loose, addition and subtraction. I mean, if we're looking for a recommendation for a limit, I think it's $7.5 million should be realistic. If not 8 million, I could be convinced to go that high, but no higher. That's just based on some of the basic forecasts and the minimal amounts that we've talked about and netting out, with the assumption and caveat about the rough estimation of the DC component for that third project that we're not quite sure about. There could be upwards of 700, but that is no way a guarantee that it is 700. So, you know, that's my caveat. So that's why I'm basing that threshold on, but open to any other suggestions, or if council has other recommendations, I'm open for that as well. But if you're looking for a number, there's a place to start. With that.
I guess unless I hear different from staff, I'm looking more for the individual itemized numbers as opposed to the overall.
Sure.
Just a simple example, if it's 8 million and 6.9 of it's the fire hall, but the other two come in around a million bucks, $500,000, I'd prefer to see those two go ahead, and we got to reconsider the fire hall at that point. So maybe unless staff wants just one number, but I don't think that's what you're looking for. You're looking for.
I can break it down that number if you'd like. I mean, so I was using the low end of the let's just round it to 4.2 million for the fire hall, $2 million for the Cavan Works Yard, and then roughly 800,000 for the Millbrook Works Yard.
Okay. I know where my numbers are. They were less. And it's okay to disagree.
Yeah, I just want to put one out there and see what happens.
So at some point, we're going to end up with something. Councillor Moore, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I just think we have to be realistic, because when we originally got some of these numbers, it was long before the cost of things have changed. And I mean, I know we shouldn't sky limit because we certainly can't afford it, but we have to be realistic too. Like not just the fire station, everything. Like when we're going from 1.5 million, what did you say, to 800,000? That's a big jump down, but there's got to be someplace in the middle.
But you got to remember too, put it in perspective. I'll say it bluntly: municipalities, in my estimation, get they get gouged. And
They do.
Put it back into perspective. We're looking at a 4-bay garage with maybe an office and a bathroom. That's what we're looking at. And to suggest that it's $1.5 million, if it was personal money, I'm not spending $1.5 million on a 4-bay garage with a bathroom and an office. And so I think we really need to sharpen the pencils. In my estimation, I'm not comfortable putting that amount out for essentially that's what you're getting. And the same can be said for other buildings. And I know they can be done for significantly less, because I'm aware of one that has. So I'm gone higher than what it was, and maybe we need to add others. But I don't want to set the bar too high, because I can guarantee whatever we set the bar at, it's a high probability that you might get something there, and it's only going up.
Well, I don't think it should go in at the highest point either. I just don't think I just think if everything is met that we're asking for, we might have to go a little higher than the lowest suggestion, because these prices were brought out before the COVID costs were increased, and hopefully they're going to go down. But we're talking a lot of differences in dollars right now from what it was 6-8 months ago.
Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I don't have a problem with Deputy Mayor Graham's numbers. I think they're probably all right. I think, you know, what we need to do is be able to control the tendering process and be able to have our yeses and nos on each of these projects individually and weigh them on their own merit. And even if somebody comes in under that price, it's not an automatic win. Yeah, but it is, you know, we do get to review it, find out what is these bids and what are these tenders. I know it probably adds to the timeline, which doesn't help people, but I think, you know, we've injected ourselves into this process, and I think we need to stay injected into it. You know, and if these bids do come in, you know, higher than what we've set it at, then, you know, let's review it and find out why.
Yeah,
but
I guess
not have to commit to anything that arrives.
I don't know, but if it's under that amount, then I'm thinking we are going to have to commit. So in other words, we have to be comfortable with it. So if the amount's $2 million, you got to be prepared to pay $2 million. And I guess fundamentally, I'll speak to it. I'm aware of another build within the municipality that's been done during COVID and during all these high prices, and it's half of that $2 million. And so fundamentally, I've got a problem with $2 million as being our low benchmark. I know we can do better, and I'd like to try to do better. But I know if we put in it at $2 million, don't be expecting something to come in at 1.2. That's out the window. Somebody's not coming in at 1.2 if that's what you do. And with our renovations at the township office, we put it out at 400,000, and guess what? We got a 400,000 in, and we also got a 1.2. So I don't know. I'm not comfortable with the higher numbers. I'd like to keep the flexibility with the township and with our council to move ahead. And I'm not saying if it comes in at 2 and that's the lowest of 8 tenders, it's 2, then you know what? Maybe we'll have to consider it at that time. But I don't like the higher numbers. I just don't. I have a hard time feeling gouged.
So do you want to, sorry,
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
maybe I missed it, but do you want to divulge what your numbers are?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't think, I know you're talking about one project, but, and also just, I wanted to just remind Councillor Moore, that 800,000 wasn't all, it was netting out the DCs that we are potentially eligible for in that other project, Kathy, not, so it's not cutting in
No,
half. So I just wanted to clarify that, but anyways, Mayor, if you want to make a recommendation, then we can talk about it and go forward.
Sorry,
I
yeah.
don't-
So that was how I started at the beginning, but I didn't make a motion. I was just putting it out for discussion. But it was 1.2 million for the operations center. It was 4 million for the fire hall, and it was 750,000 for the Millbrook yard. Those were the numbers, and I do quite frankly believe they're very reasonable. One in particular is in light of another project that I'm aware of that's taking place, and which is what I've based off it. It's not suggest that our lowest number coming in isn't going to exceed that. But I believe it does provide us with flexibility to make that determination at the time, as we did with the CMCC, when we ended up having to go $2.4 million over what we were prepared to do so. Ms. Pope?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we are speaking about the same dollar value for each project. If we could reference the actual construction cost in the same way that the consultant has, because I think each time we talk about the public and Parks and Public Works building, I don't want there to be any confusion if it's, you know, you can add in the difference that you get from the DCs or subtract it from the DCs. So if we just talk about the construction cost itself, that would help. And then we'll apply, of course, the DCs and the revenues and what we have in reserves accordingly. But if we could talk about construction cost as your cost, that just helps keep everything clear. And then hopefully whatever motion goes forward today, it's the same language included. And then there's no potential confusion whether or not you're adding or subtracting the DCs from it.
So on that page, that's before us right now, we've got the three items, and we've got the fire station, Public Works, and Parks and Public Works building. So what I was proposing was the top one would be 4 million, the fire station. The second one was the 1.2, and the third one was the 750,000.
Okay.
So the numbers are apples to apples. That's what I was proposing.
Okay, so in that example, just for clarity, if it's 750,000 and we were to double our space, it would be half of the 750 that we could include
Correct.
in the DCs. Thank you. That's what I needed clarified. Thank you.
Absolutely. And the same thing would be reflective of the Public Works and the fire station as well when it comes to DCs.
Right.
The relative proportion. Yep. So where's council sit? We couple ideas on the table. Yeah, I'm encouraged because I know council wants to move forward with something. We want to get this going, and we're working on numbers. But I'm confident we're going to come up with a number so we can move forward today. Councilor Huntley or Councilor Moore, because I know Deputy Mayor and I have had several discussions on this, and it's all good. We'll figure it out. But we're looking to the other two maybe to.
We're only $1 million apart.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Ultimately, I saw half a hand, and Councilor Moore, I saw a wink. Which one is it?
Oh, I would.
Councilor Huntley, go ahead.
Through you, Chair. I think the 4.2 is fair for the fire station.
Yeah.
I mean, I would go with your number on the Public Works Operations Center. The Public Works building, I would say it's probably closer to 800 or 900 versus your 750.
That's what I think.
All right, I think we got a compromise. Deputy Mayor Graham, you okay? Because Councilor Huntley and Councilor Moore are quickly moving and seconding a motion here with some specific numbers in it. And I think Deputy Mayor Graham and I might be agreeable to.
So I'm just going to reiterate, and you tell me if I'm wrong. So chicken scratching around here. 4.2, Councilor Huntley on the fire hall. I believe, Mayor, it was 1.2 for the cabin yard, and then 800, and then 800,000 on the Millbrook yard, correct?
That Councilor Huntley? Yes.
So that's a total of 6.2 million. Okay, yeah, I mean, I'll go along with it with the caveat that I hope that we're not wrong and we already haven't laid our cards on the table for this process, which is my big concern, as Councilor Huntley raised. Like, I mean, we have no guarantees on how we're going to move forward with this, and we're trying to establish a threshold. My concern is, and maybe I'll look to the CAO to make a comment, is that by taking this approach with these adjusted numbers in our tendering process, what is the worst case implication on the timeline of these projects moving forward if we need to reconsider? And if you can I'm sure everyone we're all coming from this, we're all on the same page just trying to work out the finalities of it. And we all know that there's risks that even these best efforts of this conversation today might be futile. But with that said, I want a reassurance from the CAO, if I could ask for it, just to say, if we need to readjust this tact, what is the delay potentially that we'd be facing by doing it this way? And if there's any other comments that she has for this, I'm open to hearing those as well.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Graham and Council. If that's the threshold that Council would like to make note of and go forward with the tender process, then we will take note of that budgetary items at the rates that or the numbers that you've identified here right now. We'll start drafting the tender process and the tender documents to carry out that process. We will probably, our goal before we even came to Council today was that the tender documents would potentially be ready to be sent out around mid-September to the end of September is what we were proposing with Council's support today. So we're hoping that, I don't think there's any delay of the tender documents based on what you're talking about today. We might want to seek some, a little bit more clarification on language that Councillor Huntley identified here today with regards to risk. But we're still looking towards having these documents potentially ready to go for the end, or sent out publicly for the end of September.
So can I just clarify,
Okay,
Mayor, if I may
Mayor
follow up? Just a follow-up caveat and maybe a bit more clarity on my initial question with one of them. Should this threshold, so two things, I guess I'll start with the other first. One, the only addition to Councillor Huntley's comments is the flexibility to pick and choose rather than having to, go all in with one provider. I think it's in our best interest to have that flexibility as a part of that tender as well. So I just want to make sure that's captured. And then lastly, I was more referring to the instance that should we not receive any tender offers that, meet these thresholds, we would then need to re-tender. I mean, the need for the facilities is still going to exist, and exists with some urgency. So I was just looking for, should we need to re-engage or reassess the tendering process? What timeline you foresee is that being an implication on the projects as a whole?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Deputy Graham, the more we'll have to come back to Council no matter what. So if we issue these tenders and say we receive one, but we don't receive another, it doesn't. All three will have to come back, whether they're done jointly or done individually. And I think internally with staff, I'd like to have further conversation with staff on whether or not we want to do them jointly or not. But once we establish the threshold for budget, we'll start drafting the tender documents. If we don't receive one or we receive all, they'll all come back. Is there a delay? Yes, potentially we'd take a look at why we didn't receive any tender proposals, possibly. And then we'll take a look and have that discussion at a proper Council meeting where you can discuss, what that rate would be. If it's less, I doubt it. They're never less. If it's increased, we have to increase it based on whatever the findings are. But until then, I don't know. But what I can clarify is every one of these would be coming back to Council for discussion.
Very good. Thank you.
I think, though, given the difference between the projects, myself personally, I'd like to see them tendered separately with the opportunity to move ahead with them separately if it's so, because my concern is when you have your matrix and your checklist about past experience, I don't want to eliminate everybody that's built a works yard and what's in Millbrook or the operations center because they haven't done a fire hall. And I think you can get fantastic operations centers and Millbrook yard buildings from a company that may not necessarily be able to bid or doesn't have past experience on fire hall. So I'd like to see, certainly if somebody come in and do all three and they're bidding and so be it on each of the three, or provide a discount if they are awarded all three. But I would like to see the other two, the possibility to move ahead with them independent of the other ones. If somebody comes in with a fantastic price, I don't want to hold it up because they didn't bid on the fire hall. Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I think that it goes back into the flexibility of the tenure, right? We just need to make sure that the wording is in there that allows us to be as flexible as possible when it comes to making those decisions.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, through Mr. Chairman, I do believe that we need to have further dialogue with regards to that. And you're both right. I think you're both correct. I think we have to take a look and see if does it make sense to continue with them, recognizing that they're different works, or do you put a caveat and draft the tender in a certain way that allows for that? So I hear what you're saying and I appreciate it, but leave it with us and we'll take a look and see what our best options are.
Okay.
I think I think Mr. Hancock and I have already had a conversation today of whether or not they should be separate based on criteria for a fire station and construction for a works depot. So we'd certainly understand and hear your comments for sure.
I think at the end of the day, what you're hearing from members of council is it's a high priority to move ahead with these projects. And I would hate to see one or two projects held up because we're stumbling on a third project that isn't coming in on budget or something. I don't want everything all held up. Each of those buildings needs to be replaced. And I think we're all in agreement of that. So as long as that flexibility is going to be in there, that we can divide the projects and move ahead, I think that's fantastic. I think we'd all be happy. Deputy Mayor Graham?
The only other comment through you, Mayor, is that, my support for the third project being the Millbrooks Yard is conditional on that DC eligibility for that project being achieved. So I'm sure that's been made clear, and from what Kimberly has shared with us, it seems as though there won't be any issues with doing that, but should issues arise, as things have occurred in the past, that I just want that caveat also in addition to that flexibility, if that's a possibility.
Ms. Hurley and then Councilor Huntley.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, due to the DC process and what has to be carried out for that process, that is one of the projects that could be delayed based on getting that DC update done for the background study. So I'm not sure on the timing on that. I think Ms. Pope, if I could ask Ms. Pope, I think the intent was that a report would come back in September for that.
Yes, the second meeting in September, yes.
So I just need to, I understand the priority. I also understand that has to be in place as per Deputy Mayor's requests with regards to making sure that background study is in there. So we just need to have a staff discussion on how to roll that out regarding timing.
Yeah, and as a follow-up, that's just my opinion. I mean, if council doesn't agree with me that it should move forward regardless of that outcome, then by all means, I just wanted that consideration expressed, because that's my feeling.
I completely agree with you. So now that's half the council today.
There you
go. Councilor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. I'm happy to move this with the numbers we've discussed. I would love to see what the clerk has tried to draft up our motion on this, though. I don't know whether we need a minute to figure out what the actual wording is, or what state we were at.
So there's quite a few pages here, but here's the kick at the can. I think number one stays as it is. If we want to add for information at the end, we can. We just have that council receives the information. So number one, I think is fine. Number two, what if we say that council directs staff to proceed with the tendering process with the budgeted construction costs for each project? 4.2 million for fire station, 1.2 million for the Public Works Operations Center, 800,000 for the Parks and Public Works building. Here's where we could add something along with the potential of the applicable development charges upon completion of the review. Another point I think we should add is to allow the flexibility within the tender for each project to be quoted independently or in collaboration. And then lastly, report back to council for consideration.
Wow, well done.
Yep. So to the point with regards to the development charges, obviously we would hold the Millbrook Yard until such time that we've got confirmation of the DCs being incorporated into it. And I know the timing might work out just the way it is anyways, but I think that speaks to Deputy Mayor's point on, if we tender it, it's too late. There's no undoing it regardless of the DC study. I think but we should know in September, second meeting, that again, confirmation that but which should fit in really nicely with the tendering process.
You looking for a mover?
Are we good? Good? Oh, so we got Councillor Huntley already, and I think we had Councillor Moore, didn't we? Or no?
Through you, Mayor McFadden, yes, I do have Councillor Huntley and Councillor Moore. Those numbers were a little different, but if both are in favor, then we can move forward with them as a mover and seconder.
Okay. All right, very good. And we've got that little caveat with regards to the development charges as it relates to the Millbrook Yard project.
Yes.
Okay.
And staff, as long as Ms. Hurley and Ms. Pope are comfortable with the motion on the table and have a clear understanding on the verbiage of the development charges, I think we're good with the motion.
All right, very good. Excellent. Madam
I just
Clerk.
want to see a nod from either of them to make sure they're both good. Sorry.
Oh, you're looking for staff nods.
Staff, yeah. Just want to make sure Ms. Hurley and Ms. Pope are both comfortable with that motion.
I believe
I'm
we're
good.
good.
I'm good, Cindy.
I see 2 nods.
Okay, well then, if you're ready, Mayor
I
McFadden.
see the happy dance going on in Chief Belfour and Mr. Hancock's office.
I wish I could turn my screen around because you're absolutely right, Mayor McFadden.
I think Deputy Mayor Graham had a question before we vote. I think.
Okay, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Huntley, and through you, Mayor. Just Kimberly, I believe you made comment to this, but just again, seeing as we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's today, because of I really did appreciate the financial breakdown, and I'm assuming that when these tender process for all of these projects come forward, that you'll be updating and bringing that back to council as a part of your report.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. All right, Madam Clerk, call for recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes,
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Well done. Thank you very much to all of staff and council. It was a very productive conversation, and I know there was a lot of work that went into it. Thank you. Our next report, planning 2021-35, Tower Hill North Developments Limited Official Plan Amendment OPA 1-18, zoning bylaw amendment ZBA 07-18 and plan subdivision 15P-18002. Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the rest of the council. Just a couple more revisions I want to make sure that the report is complete and that the readability is there with respect to what council is considering. So a few minor adjustments. One is in the first recommendation, I'd refer to OPA 1-18, and that's actually the application number. It should read official plan amendment number 7, and that would change not only on the front page of the report, through the report, but also on attachment number 7, which is the actual bylaw itself, which is bylaw 2021-44, that we would just substitute where it reads amendment number 1-18, that is number 7. That's, if approved, that's actually what the amendment will be from here on in. So I do apologize. That's something I should have picked up earlier. The only other change is to make sure, again, for completeness on attachment number 4, if you read number 4, it says the draft plan. The one thing it should also have is the revision date, which is April 30th, 2021. Again, it's the exact same plan of subdivision, the exact same thing we're there, but I want to make sure that it captures not only when it was prepared and signed by the owner and surveyor, but also when it was revised, so that we are all talking about the exact same plan of subdivision and the details that are there are applicable to it. So with that, the only other thing I would add is that in terms of within the report itself, on page 2 of the report, I didn't play it up in the sense that it should have been more clear that in the second full sentence it starts with the subject lands of the proposed subdivision. I did indicate that there'll be designation of institutional. I should have been more precise and more accurate in terms of saying that even in the second sentence that will be realigning institutional use as well. It is there and it's inferred, but I want it to be very clear that council realizes there is a portion of that institutional that's being realigned as well. And then lastly, on page 3 as well, which was one of the concerns, and this is with respect to the 3 versus 4 stories. It would have been more precise and accurate, complete to include reference to section 4.1.3 of our official plan with respect to our proviso with respect to 3 versus 4 stories. The application is looking for an increase in number of stories. Our maximum now is 3. The idea is to go to a maximum of 4. So again, I do apologize for those amendments, but I think what that does is that changes and makes sure that it's more accurate and that everyone reads that. So you council, you have before you plan report 2021-35, Tower Hill Developments Limited Official Plan Amendment OPA 1-18, Zoning Bylaw Amendment ZBA-7-18, and Plan of Subdivision 15T 18,002. The recommendations, there are 4 of them. The council approved bylaw number 2021-44 to adopt official plan amendment number 7, as per my revision before, to the Township of Cavan-Monaghan. That council authorized the submission of the adopted official plan amendment to Peterborough County for review and approval. That 3, that council support the approval of application 15T-18,002, subject to the draft plan conditions, providing attachment number 4 to this report. And I did make that one revision to talk about the revision date of April 30th. And then lastly, that the approval of the associated zoning bylaw amendment be deferred until draft plan approval is received from Peterborough County. So this, again, your worship, through you to council, this report has come forward. So in January 27th, I'll remind that the developer had a neighborhood meeting, solicited information, questions and answers from the public. We brought back at a special council meeting the statutory meeting of under the Planning Act on March 25th, 2021. And what we've done in this report is talk about not only reference to that, but also there's 6 areas where we've had either verbal submissions through the neighborhood meeting, through the regulatory meeting, at the statutory meeting on March 25th, but also written comments. And those sort of comments center on 6 particular areas, which I've outlined in the report. One is about the height of the apartment buildings. Second, with respect to a comment with respect to climate change and how this development will either work towards or achieve some of our climate change action plan goals. The third is around the seniors apartment building and the idea of accessibility and accessibility design. Fourth is with respect to parkland dedication, open space and trails, and talked about the connectivity, the identification of open space and trails, the treatment thereof. Another point that was raised by the public in written submission was the loss of agricultural land, the costs associated with growth, and that's specifically focusing on some of the fiscal impact of the cost of new development versus agricultural land and looking at that. And then 6, which is a significant part of this application, is the idea of the aquifer, the trout population, the stream alignment. That's something that has been a significant part of the work here. It's something that's involved a lot of discussion with not only the consultant and their developers, but also the County of Peterborough and Autonomy Region Conservation Authority. We've come to a point where there has been decision in principle to support the channel realignment, subject to a number of conditions, monitoring, things like that, all of which will be revised and detailed later on in the process, but we'll come back to council as well as that information comes forward. So the balance of the report talks about an analysis with respect to the conformity with the county official plan, the township official plan, the provincial policy statement, and also the growth plan itself. So before you have that recommendation, and if you have any questions of council, I'm happy to answer those as best I can.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Connolly. Questions from members of the council? Councillor Huntley. Oh, Councillor Huntley, you're muted.
Yep, realize that. Thank you, Chair. I have one question. It's more about the process, I believe, Mr. Connolly. And that's recommendation number 4. Like you're asking me to not receive and defer something? Like, why would you just not even give it to us if we're just going to defer it anyway? I'm curious about why number 4 is even here.
Sure, through your worship and to Councillor Huntley. Taking cues from what we did with Tower Hill South and how we also looked at the commercial piece, the idea is that we're dealing with the official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw, which is under our council's, your council's decision, that's final, and the plan of subdivision. What we're doing is making sure that all 3 are dealt with at once, so it's comprehensive as a package. The decision making with respect to the official plan and the plan of subdivision lay with the county, and with the zoning bylaw is with township. So I think this is language we've used before when we brought this forward, Tower Hill South specifically. And what I've done is just say that contingent upon, and council really couldn't make a decision on the final part of the zoning bylaw until the county has made a decision on the official plan, as well as draft approval on the plans, the subdivision itself. And then it would come back, and then that zoning bylaw would be back to council for that final decision to say, based on this, those conditions have been approved, therefore we can make a decision on that.
So through you, Chair, then we could really throw a wrench in the things if we approve number 4 without deferring? Or is it just not really possible?
Well, I think if council wishes to do that, they could. I struggle with the idea that whether or not we could make a decision on that, but I think the other part is, practically speaking, with the draft conditions of approval, let's say for the plan of subdivision, you have before you an attachment 4, a fairly exhaustive list. it's drawing on the experience for Tower Hill South, the first phase of this development. The county, through its work with not only itself, but its agencies like ORCA, have provided a number of other conditions attached to that. I think we as council would like to see that, or staff would like to present to council, what are those additional conditions before you were to sort of sign on in the final stage and say, okay, we approve all of this in its entirety. Again, council can do as it wishes, but this is best advice from a process perspective, and something that we've done before as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Conlon.
I guess further to your point, in other words, approve in principle the zoning is what you're suggesting, pending the outcome, because obviously we can't put it in place until the OP is approved at the county. One and the same. Is there any possibility that it doesn't have to come back for further approval because we're deferring it, so we aren't approving? So could you actually just approve it in principle once they've done their approval? I mean, to Councillor Huntley's point, it's a process intensive here, going back and forth to defer to bring it back.
Through your worship to Councillor Huntley and to the rest of council, of course it's something we could do. Maybe I could draw on Karen Ellis in terms of why this was done before for Tower Hill South and the advantage from a process perspective. There will be a number of times of this. My hope was to have these dealt with as with as few touch points as possible with council, not to waste your time, but to make sure that you have an idea of what's being decided as we go forward. So again, the hope was that, unlike Tower Hill South, where we dealt with there was no OP amendment there. There was just zoning. There was a plan of the subdivision that came twice. The idea was to come forward with all three. This is a discussion we had with county planning staff as well. So it was seen as a time saver there, but perhaps there's a better way to do that. Karen?
Councillor Huntley, I got Councillor Huntley, and then we'll go over to Karen. Go ahead,
Okay. Through you, Chair, then, would it make sense for us just to approve it in principle and have it only come back on an exception basis versus it come back just to come back? Like, if we're comfortable with it and we let it go and we say, unless there's another issue, yeah, we're good.
Karen, perhaps you want to.
Good afternoon, Mayor McFadden, members of council. I would suggest, based on my experience, that you can't approve it in principle. A zoning bylaw amendment, you either approve it or you don't, because you're passing a bylaw. The draft before you today is in a form that regulates the development as proposed, but without formal approval of the subdivision. We don't know if there might be minor tinkering required to that zoning bylaw amendment to reflect any red line revisions that might happen. Similarly, I think there's a couple of small items that staff might like to discuss with the developer in terms of what might happen on the ground floor of the high density residential unit. So my recommendation to you today is that you do not approve it until such time as we're in a better position to know what the county's position is with regard to the subdivision, and give staff time to talk about these last couple of items with the developer.
So to be clear then, Ms. Ellis, you're asking us to approve a deferral.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council and Councillor Huntley. Technically, yes, I guess you're right, but I think as John has indicated, it's important for you to see the draft bylaw before you today, so you clearly understand what it is you're approving, because there are some significant changes to the zoning bylaw that will happen with Tower Hill North. So you need to be aware of that. And so the draft bylaw is before you today. It still needs to be finalized, if you'll notice, with some numbering in terms of the exception zones, etc. So based on what your comments are today, staff could go back and finalize that bylaw, in addition to considering what the county of Peterborough might have to say about the subdivision. Because if you approve a zoning bylaw amendment today and we pass a bylaw, which is fully within your right, we have to provide notice that you've done that. There's an appeal period. And then if something happens that the development of the subdivision doesn't occur exactly as proposed in the plan identified by John earlier, then we're back into doing a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance. So you're going back into another planning approval. By asking you to defer a decision, we are hoping to not have to do another planning approval.
So I guess in efforts of streamlining the process, and I can appreciate that it has to come back as part of this process, in light of our meeting schedule, which is once at the beginning of July, once at the beginning of August, and then the county meeting is right after our meeting of August, which really pushes this to September in order to get something through that really is not that intensive. This conversation is not going to go on as long as the last one on the fire hall and the public works yard, but in essence will take us 3 months to get to the end goal. Would it not be possible then in trying to streamline the process that we could call a special meeting then at the beginning of August in order to approve something that comes back from the county, recognizing that really all of this has already been up here for discussion. We do not expect major changes, but to respect the process, we are waiting for that approval by the county at the beginning of August, which we could follow up with a special council meeting to deal with this one item so that we don't have to delay for another entire month in order to do what essentially will most likely be a rubber stamping exercise by council.
So if I can, I'll through you to chair to the council. So with that, yes, of course, we could have a special meeting. I think the one thing you need to take into consideration in that timing is that any decision on the Planning Act, there's 20-day appeal period. So when the county makes its decision, we have to make sure that it's at least 21 days in order to do that. But again, council has the will and the ability to be able to call that meeting whenever it sees fit. And if it's the idea of speeding this up because this application has been in discussions and in negotiations in terms of getting down to the details since November of 18, absolutely. Maybe Ms. Ellis has more to add to that, but.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council and to John, I think certainly over the next couple of weeks, we could probably pull everything together and come to you with a report that you could deal with at the August meeting. If the county is fairly certain that the layout of the subdivision is going to be approved as proposed, because they'll have the benefit of having other agency conditions and comments. So I think that's certainly doable, that we could clean everything up, present it to you, and you could make a decision at that point in time.
So we would be able to make the decision the day before that goes to county?
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, I'm not sure what the county schedule is in terms of considering the application. So after today's meeting, we'll have to forward information to the county in terms of the draft plan conditions and outlining council support for the application. The official plan amendment has to be approved before the subdivision can be approved, I believe. They might do them at the same time. But just so you know, there is paperwork to be assembled with the official plan amendment that has to be submitted to the county. So there's a certificate page, there's the clerk's record, there's all this information that gets attached to that documentation that goes to the county. They have to have a chance to review the OPA. They'll make a decision whether they need to recirculate it or if they'll accept our circulation and the comments received as part of that process. And then they'll do a report and make a recommendation to county council.
Very good. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Graham, you've been very patient again.
No problem. I have I guess it's one comment and one question. I really wanted to thank the considerations and the inclusion and incorporation of the accessibility into those higher density facilities. I think that's going to be important, and the openness as well to accommodate that accessibility into other portions of the development as well. I think that's a real critical deficiency from our complete community pursuit right now. And I think that's going to be a really important component to address the needs of our community. So I really wanted to thank the developer for that. My other comment is, and it's probably not worth making here, and it has nothing to do with the developer or the consideration, but I just wanted to go on the record in my objection to a location of a future school on where it's been allocated or identified or requested by the school board in this nature. I think that's I have huge concerns about the redevelopment of that area for that purpose, but I will fight on that hill another day. But to Ms. Ellis, the other thing that I can't help but ask for clarification on is the comment about any utilization other than residential in the higher density now 4-story developments. In the conversations in the public meetings held by the developer, there was no discussion about any alternative use other than residential. And I'm sure the conversation would have been much different about that consideration had that been something under consideration. And I don't see it very well outlined throughout this document as well. So I'm going to need some clarification on that before I'm able to vote in approval of the amendment as it's proposed now, because that is a huge concern to me.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to Deputy Mayor Graham and members of council. The issue of having some small scale local commercial uses on the ground floor of the higher density building or buildings has been discussed with this developer. Things like a hairdresser or a barber shop, that type of thing, a service oriented facility that really serves a local population. So right now, as drafted, the zoning bylaw does not permit any commercial use.
Correct.
The official plan amendment, which will redesignate some of the lands residential, in the residential designation, small scale local commercial uses are permitted. So this is one item that I think we need to come to confirm with the developer. If there's no intention for any commercial, that's fine, then the draft bylaw can proceed with the final cleanup. If in fact it is their intention to have any kind of service, like commercial service for those senior residents in particular, again, to increase accessibility, to create a complete community, that kind of thing, then it needs to be addressed in the zoning bylaw amendment.
Right. So my question is, I will not support that component of that time. So I don't want to miss the opportunity to have that conversation. So maybe you can elaborate on the process, because that is an amendment I will not be in favor of. And if it's an opportunity that is going to be pursued, you know, we can, if you need the direction from council now, maybe I'm on my island again, and that's fine. But I am not in support of any small scale commercial within that residential development, because it takes away from the intended, or as far as I understood, the actual amount of occupancy for residents that we are pursuing with the exception to this additional story. It is not to provide opportunities for commercial services. And a lot of those industries that you just mentioned are widely available in the village. And for those to be cannibalized by some sort of special exception to move competitive businesses upwards, well, you know, I'm gonna be in stark opposition to that. So I'm looking for direction from either yourself or maybe the CAO, as if you want council direction on that, we can vote for it. And if I lose, so be it, but it won't be because I didn't bring it up.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council and Deputy Mayor Graham, direction would be appreciated, because if in fact the council members are not interested in the pursuit of that, then staff will not pursue it, and we can proceed to finalize and tidy up the zoning bylaw amendment as proposed. I can tell you in the discussions that we've had historically, it was not, the commercial uses are not intended to cannibalize the downtown. I think our official plan is very clear and very strong in that the business center in Millbrook is the community core, so to speak, and that's where we want those business opportunities. I think the intention was to permit some very small scale service type uses, so that people who may not be as mobile as the majority of the population could still access those services, just to make life easier for them. But as I said, if it's a non-starter for council, that is good information to know.
Well, no, and through you, Mayor, I understand the pursuit, but I also understand that those sorts of pursuits can very quickly move offline and be manipulated into things that could theoretically cannibalize the village of Millbrook. And it hasn't been brought up to this point, as far as I'm understand. And I've never seen it in regards to the documentation about this development that they have asked for it. So, maybe there's these rumblings of discussion, but that's a big, big change from what has been presented to the public and been discussed for the many years that this has been, circulating in the area. So I don't believe the development, maybe things have changed, but if you want that direction, and like I said, maybe other councilors want to speak to it, but I'm happy to make that motion in support of the rest of the document, just not in that component that's been the caveat for. And I'm not going to ask for support about the education lands, because I know that's nothing to do with the development and nothing to do with moving forward. That'll be a school board discussion at a later date.
Mr. Conley.
Through your worship to Councillor Graham, right now before you with the documentation before you, including the draft wording for the zoning bylaw amendment, does not include that component of the commercial piece. That was part of what Ms. Ellis and myself had said, that there had been discussions at the staff level, but if it is the will of council and you want to give us that direction, that'll make that cleanup that much easier and that much quicker.
Just a question from procedure. I'm just trying to think in light of, I'd like to bring it forward and so we can either head that direction or not head that direction. My concern is with doing a negative motion. Should we just do the positive? Because then if it fails, then we'll continue on the current one. So not to take anything away from you, Deputy Mayor Graham, but I think we'd be further ahead to do a positive motion supporting it. And then if it's defeated, then we've turned it down. We have not supported moving ahead. I guess to the clerk, does it matter? As opposed to saying we will not do it and we defeat it, then you end up with a double negative. Does that mean you therefore support it? I'm not. Miss Page.
Through you, Mayor, I'm happy to support it as it exists, with the understanding that should such an accommodation or request be coming forward, that it must be brought back before council for consideration.
No, what I'm thinking though is if Miss Ellis is already going to have those conversations with the developer, rather than waste her time having those conversations, if it's defeated now, then there's no sense having the conversations because we've already turned it down. If it is supported, then it supports her talking. I guess I'm looking to the clerk or Ms. Hurley. Is there a preferred motion to provide clear direction? Because I don't want to be getting into this double negative, therefore it's implied because we defeated something else. Just a straight vote and to provide clear direction. Ms. Hurley? Or Ms. Page, we got a hand up over there. I saw Ms. Page.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just for one question, or for clarity before Ms. Page speaks. My understanding is this is not a request. The developer has not requested this to come forward. There was previous discussions that had, however, that is not under consideration at this time. So if I'm a little surprised that it's coming back up again today because the discussions took place, they didn't go forward. Therefore, what is before you today is what's before you today. So maybe I'm seeking clarification with Ms. Ellis or Mr. Conley on, I know what the deputy mayor is requesting and it's not on the application to date. So I'm just not sure why we're still having a conversation about this.
So through you, your worship, to council and to the CEO, what you have before you is exactly reflects the discussions to date. I think one of the things that Ms. Ellis had talked about is that with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment and any cleanup, the idea of coming back, this was an issue that I don't think all of it was fully dismissed and got rid of. But if there is clarity in terms of the sense that this will not be pursued, then what you have before you reflects the fact that will not be pursued. But notwithstanding that, with the motion that's here before, we will bring this back once the county has dealt with the official plan and the plan of subdivision. We will bring back the zoning bylaw amendment, and there's confirmation of that. If you wish to be able to add something here which positively says that, you know, that we understand what the intent of council is now, so we will not bring that back. The discussions with the developer will not happen with respect to anything of introducing commercial space on the ground floor of any of those buildings. But if you want to have a specific direction from council, have an amendment, as the mayor had indicated, something brought forward and then defeated, that adds just further clarity to something which is already clear from my perspective. So unless Ms. Ellis has something else to add to that.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, no, I think if all council is on the same page, then it's a non-issue at this point.
And through you, Mr. To the chair, to Mr. Conley, I think that's one of the reasons why the OP, it's imperative that the OP gets approved, and then the zoning will follow.
Agreed. And that's why it is before you the way it is.
I guess my only concern with the process, and I apologize, I'm not trying to make it any more confusing. However, if we don't say anything one way or the other on this today, and our staff approach them or they approach or vice versa, would you like to have commercial? And the answer from back is yes. And then it goes to council and we say, no, why did we initiate the discussion in the first place? I think it would be helpful if it doesn't matter which way this decision goes, but if we're very clear so that we don't reach out and ask if they'd like it and then say, but you can't have it anyways because we just voted on it. So Deputy Mayor Graham, are you good? If we just hold a vote yes or no, and that way everybody's clear and there's no confusion. Okay. And back to the clerk, the original question, you know what we're trying to do. How would you like the motion worded so that it's clear? I prefer not to end up with a double negative implying something else. I think, are we voting to the motion? The way I see it is to support commercial on the main floor of the high density residential blocks. I think that would be the positive motion. And if it's defeated, that means no, it's not permitted. And if it's supported, it means yes, it is. Am I wrong in the analysis, or is there a better way to word it? I think we're all on the same page of trying to word this motion correctly.
You would need a mover and a seconder for that, though.
No. I'm looking to Ms. Page first to clarify which motion it is, and then we'll get a mover and a seconder.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, I would say a positive makes it easier, but I do want to quickly clarify something, because as it stands now, from what I'm understanding through staff, the bylaw that's before us today, as that recommendation says, is to be deferred. As it stands now, there's no component of the commercial, and I understand where you're coming from, Mayor McFadden. There's nothing in there. So are we just looking for a motion today just to say, exactly like you said, to include the commercial component in the zoning bylaw amendment to allow like commercial on the ground floor of the high-rise buildings, and you want a mover and a seconder, and then you want a recorded vote if that moves forward or if it doesn't, to be included to come back with this bylaw amendment? Because right now, the bylaw amendment really is not even on the table, from what I'm understanding through staff. Like, it's ultimately that motion should be reread to say that, or rewritten to say the approval of the associated zoning bylaw amendment be brought back to council upon the approval, or once approval is received by Peterborough County. Then, from what I'm understanding from staff, we would have the discussions about the commercial. So I honestly am not the specialist when it comes to the Planning Act. I can work with the motion, so it's entirely what makes the most sense to council and staff.
I guess my concern is, what I'm trying to avoid is our staff reaching out to the developer and saying, would you like commercial? And then they do their analysis and they say, yes, we would. And then we have to respond, say, actually, you can't have it anyways. Like, that's sort of the conversation I'd like to avoid. If we're not going to permit it, and we just say we're not going to permit it. Otherwise, I don't want to offer it and then take it away. Kind of, I'm trying to assist. Deputy Mayor Graham.
Okay.
My suggestion was, if you want to notice a motion at the end of the meeting to keep it separate from this, we can do that too.
Just through you, Mayor McFadden, I thought Ms. Hurley said that those discussions were no longer on the table. So we can definitely call this vote if you want to create a motion and move forward to not include the commercial, so everybody's clear. I'm just kind of a little confused with this motion, or what we want, what the intent is at the end of it.
Well, I guess we haven't voted on it, so I mean, we've heard from Deputy Mayor his position. I happen to be the opposite, which is fine, but we're 1-1, and we haven't heard from Kathy or Ryan yet. So I don't want to prejudge where this is going, but I think if council has a majority position on the topic, I think it would be helpful for staff before they enter into further discussions on yes or no on the commercial. I'm not trying to make this complicated. I'm honestly trying to simplify it.
Me neither.
Mr. Conlon.
Through your worship to council, all of council, the intent here again was to provide it together with the zoning bylaw amendment. As it reads now, there is nothing with respect to the commercial piece. It does not touch on that. It does not provide that. It is not codified in terms of what's there. I think it is important that council, when they take a look at all the moving pieces, even those of which they don't have decisions on or the hands on the levers, such as the draft zoning bylaw, is that they understand all the things that are dependent upon that. I will, at threat of not being here anymore, bring up the idea of commercial property. It is very clear from council's intention here in the discussion that we will not be having that discussion. We won't raise it. We won't entertain it. It will not be reflected in any zoning bylaw amendment that comes back to council. You can either put that through a resolution, but notwithstanding that, at a staff level, it is understood and it's clear, much like in some of the other discussions we've had around car garages and other things of that nature, it will not be brought forward.
But I guess that's my concern, because we haven't voted on it. So that's Deputy Mayor, with all due respect, that's Deputy Mayor's position, but I'm not necessarily saying that's reflective of the council's position. So I don't want anything said about it either way if council hasn't made a thing. Like, it's because we haven't had that conversation. So I don't want to prevent the discussion. I was trying to create clarity and cause confusion, I suspect. Councilor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, I was just going to say, I don't think Mr. Connolly does have the direction to not enter into those conversations. We haven't got there yet, so I just want to make sure we haven't set direction.
When you give me that direction, I will set forward to that direction.
All right.
Okay, and I guess the other point of clarity too, because we are dealing with the OP, and this is a preliminary discussion on where we're heading with zoning, as a heads up. But if these are all designated as residential blocks and we're changing it from institutional to residential, or however that is, does that support council if we are moving to commercial on the main floor? Because we haven't provided that direction in an OP change would that not have to be reflected in the OP? Because your zoning has to support your OP, and we've got nothing in the OP that suggests that commercial could go in those residential blocks. I don't want the OP to have to come back again because then we change the zoning. Sorry, Miss Ellis, you're shaking your head, so you look the most informed on this one. I'm going to give it over to you.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. So your official plan designation is proposed to be changed from institutional to residential. In the residential designation, small scale local commercial uses are permitted as of right. So your OP or your official plan amendment is good. So
Okay.
Notwithstanding what you might decide as a council on whether small scale local commercial should be permitted in the high density residential blocks or not, the official plan policies will permit that small scale local commercial.
Okay.
The zoning bylaw would just refine that and could possibly say the uses are limited to a barber shop, a convenience store, or whatever. And put a floor area limit on it, things like that. But you are in no danger by approving, by supporting the official plan amendment today of having to bring that back at a later date to address the commercial situation.
Okay, that's wonderful. That was my only concern. In other words, you wouldn't end up with closet-sized commercial because it can't be bigger than a certain amount, and so that's good. So we can proceed. Then to staff, are you further ahead? No direction because it hasn't come forward in this zoning before us today, and just leave it and we'll deal with it at the end, or would you prefer a specific direction? Because I think council's prepared to go either direction. We're looking to staff to make your jobs easier.
My vote, if I have a vote here, it's a non-binding one, would be that clarity is the best way. That way we make sure that council is confident in what staff is doing, and that when we provide it back, there's a way to be able to say that whatever that direction is, council, it supports the will of council.
Okay, so a simple motion. Okay, Ms. Hurley, go ahead.
Okay. I don't think you need to talk about it today because your zoning bylaw is not coming back before you today. We're not talking about your zoning bylaw today. So we're talking about the OP and transfer, giving a complete application to the County of Peterborough. That once that's done, then your zoning bylaw will come back before you. At that time, you can have these discussions at that time, even though we got a sneak peek that that's going to be a good discussion with council based on the mayor and the deputy mayor, which is great. That's fine. But I don't think you need to have that discussion today. I would really I prefer my suggestion would be respectfully that you consider the recommendations that are before you today. And Ms. Ellis has just clarified the OP allows for that. You can have that discussion. It doesn't fetter anything if you keep to the recommendations that are before you today.
Okay, I think you answered our question. Very good. So staff has no direction on that particular topic. Discuss as you may, and eventually it'll come back for zoning for what may be a bigger discussion. Excellent. All right. If there is no further questions on this, we have an amended recommendation as put forth by Mr. Conley. Madam Clerk, I believe you have the updated copy and version of it.
I do, through you, Mayor McFadden.
Okay. Are we prepared to move and second? We got Deputy Mayor Graham moving, seconder, Councillor Huntley. Everybody ready to vote? Madam Clerk, recorded vote. And John, you don't get to vote on this.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right, next item, report planning 2021-36, update status report 1066 Sire Line, July 5th, 2021. Mr. Conley?
Through you, your worship, to the rest of the council, what you have before you is planning report 2021-36. Again, this is our regular status update report with respect to 1066 Sire Line. This one is for July 5th for today's date in terms of council. And what you have is, I've indicated before that we had done pre-consultation, identify 5 studies that need to be done. 3 of those 5 are threshold ones in the sense that they are key to things going forward. That's the agricultural impact assessment, the environmental impact assessment, and the Hydro-G study. I'm happy to be able to report today that the agricultural impact assessment has been completed, and that report is now finalized. The EIS is still in progress, and the field work is underway, but a number of the studies, the amphibian bird breeding surveys as well as the grassland breeding surveys. That work is being done, and then another assessment with respect to the last field unit component should be done the next 2 weeks, which I think the second of this report was done last week, so it should be at the end of this week. And with respect to the Hydro-G study, the field work continues, and what I can add is I got an email from the project manager that drilling is starting today and tomorrow and will take place on the property. So that work is well underway. I think that work will be done over the next day or two, and then we'll be getting into the report stage. So again, with that, going to the Gantt chart, taking an effort to stab every time I bring this forward to try and change the colors, as well as provide some better direction as to where we are in what I call a mall map. That's there for you with respect to attachment number 1. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any of those.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Conley. Any questions? Everybody loves the color. Excellent. Motion to receive. Councillor Huntley and Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next report, 10.5, Report Corporate Services 2021-14, bylaw to redivide the wards in the Township of Cabmonaghan. Ms. Page, the moment you've been waiting for.
Thank you, Mayor McFadden. The recommendation before you is that council approves bylaw number 2021-43, being a bylaw to redivide the wards in the Township of Cabmonaghan.
Very good. Any questions from members of council? The pictures are in color. We're all good. And we will save the discussion on naming the wards for another day.
It is all executed through ByLife. That is something that council would like to entertain moving forward. The ward bound review, as per the Municipal Act, only speaks to section 222, but we can definitely talk about amending the ward names if council would like to do that, providing there is no appeal during the next 45-day process. And I've closed that appeal process for my birthday, which gives us day 46, just as a celebration, just in case. So August 20th, the appeal process will close for our bylaw, and there'll be notification if you approve this today sent out tomorrow.
Well, I must say that was a very detailed answer for a question that you didn't see coming. So congratulations and thanks very much. Well done. Impressed. I see no further questions. So I'm going to get a mover and a seconder on the recommendation. And we've got Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion is approved. Well
Thanks.
done, Ms. Page. Next report, CAO report and capital status. Ms. Hurley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report is before you today for any discussion or questions that you might have.
Very good. I don't see any questions. Motion to receive that report. Deputy Mayor Graham. Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Council Committee verbal reports. Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. MVT met last week remotely via Zoom, and just wanted to welcome Christine Ball as the newest member of the Miller Valley Trails Committee. We're still optimistic that as we continue to move forward with opening up, that over the next maybe month or so, we'll be able to coordinate some sort of socially distant or PPH friendly work days to address some of the repairs that are definitely needed out there. So we're at the mercy of Hope Mill and their wood production that is back underway. So we'll hopefully get that in time for the works to be done. And yep, but do enjoy the trails over the summer, but do be careful and do try to abide by the directions and the closures as they are indicated, because we haven't been able to do the upkeep that we really wanted to this year for the last 2 years, realistically. So we're definitely behind, but trying to do and keep up as best we can. So, proceed with caution, but do enjoy.
Very good. Councillor Moore.
The library board just had the 3 takeaways. And actually, I thought I already gave you these ones before, but maybe not. It's the strategic planning process is underway. Public surveys out for meetings and held. They talked to Mayor McFadden and conversations with the rest of council. There's been 2 summer staff hired on grants. Funding for recently been confirmed for a third position, which will be evaluating the children's material for bias. And that's, and just that they had a constructive meeting regarding the ICIP funding renovation for the Bruce Johnson branch. So that's that for the 3 takeaways.
Excellent. And Councillor Moore, or Councillor Huntley, sorry. I heard you, Councillor Moore. Sorry, you don't have to repeat yourself. Councillor Huntley, go ahead.
Thank you, because I was trying to read this and it's on my phone and I should have printed it in.
No updates at this time.
Very good. All right, motion to receive those verbal updates. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Moore, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Oh, he's muted.
Yes, sorry.
That's all right. Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes,
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. There's no general business. Any correspondence for information? Anybody wishing to bring forward? None. Couple items for correspondence for action. Item 13.1, Fells Point production exemption request. If there's any questions, I know Ms. Hyatt is available to respond. Exciting news, we're getting another movie. Any questions? None? Ms. Hyatt, are we okay with just a motion then to approve your recommendation, which is for the removal of the, or for an exemption? And
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, yes, that would be great. If you could provide a motion that that they are exempt from requiring to get written signatures so that they can film at night and go with a notice. An example has been provided. That would be great.
excellent. Someone willing to move that motion? Councillor Moore and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
For you, Mayor McFadden, the only clause we'd like to add to that is also a one-time exemption from the noise bylaw during this filming time.
I'm pretty sure that's what Ms. Hyatt said.
Perfect. All right, so we have a mover and a seconder, and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes,
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
yes,
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you very much, Ms. Hyatt. Next item 13.2, the Town of Cochrane motion to include PSA test for men into the medical care. Councillor Huntley, motion to support.
I do support.
Very good. Seconder. Deputy Mayor Graham, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
yes,
Mayor McFadden,
Yes,
Councillor Moore,
yes,
and Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
motion is approved. We have bylaws before us, and I'm going to slow the bus down right now because I know I'm supposed to make a change. Madam Clerk, is it simply the OPA number 7? Is that the only change, or I don't have the piece of paper in front of me? I know you told me.
Through your Mayor McFadden, that is the only change.
Okay, very good. So bylaw number 2021-43 being a bylaw to redivide the wards in the township of Cabmonaghan, and bylaw number 2021-44 to adopt official plan amendment OPA 7 be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto, moved by Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes,
Councillor Moore,
yes,
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
yes.
motion is approved. There is no unfinished business. Any notices of motion? Almost had one, Deputy Mayor Graham.
Almost.
And confirming bylaw, being bylaw number 2021-45, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held July 5th, 2021, be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto, moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes,
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes,
and Councillor Moore.
yes,
motion is approved. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Huntley, Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
yes.
Motion is approved. I must say that was a very agreeable meeting. I think we had 100% on agreement today on every single motion of the meeting. Well done. We won't tell Councillor Belch when he returns. Upcoming meetings and events on Municipal Mr. Hack on July 15th at 9 a.m. via Zoom. Is there any other items or events coming that I've missed? None? All right. Thank you, everybody. That is the end of today's meeting.
Not going to mention the Lions breakfast, Scott?
Ooh, good call. Yes, Sunday at, is it, now you got me, 8:30, I think, at the Lions Den. Drive through, stay in your car. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Take care, everybody.